Today is the day. It doesn't matter what you're going through right now. Doesn't matter what you've been through in the past. What matters is that today is the day that we begin to make things better. Today's the day we begin to get a little bit stronger. Today's the day we begin to find some hope for a better future. I promise you, it's possible today. Why? Because I've made so many mistakes. I figured out what you should be doing better than I could do. So that's why we're here. Let's start the meeting.
Whatever you're going through, you will get through it because you're here. And that means you are not alone. This is the Meaningful Meeting. Now your host, Ace Cannon.
So I've got it outlined for you. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I make this point every week. I'm just a guy who's been through a bunch of stuff in life. And thanks to all the mistakes that I've made, I've kind of put together a little outline of the first 3 steps to take to kind of begin to work through and build on a successful future, or at least a better future. First, most importantly, thank you for your feedback from last week's episode. It's very important. It was a special episode to look back on the life of my daughter, who died 3 years ago last week. If you missed it, I hope you go back and check it out because it was special to sit here with my wife, Amanda, and my son, Cade, and even baby Dax was here in the studio, just 5 weeks old. And your comments and the nice things that you said, both about the episode and about my daughter and about Amanda and Cade, they're greatly appreciated. And it was rather cathartic for all of us to sit here and kind of get to share because, you know, that weight hangs over everything during the week. I've in 3 years, I've never figured out how to not be sad during that week. Do you try not to talk about it? Do you talk about it? Do you not talk about it with people you're close to? Do I not talk about it on the radio? Do I talk about it all these questions, all these things that come up when you live kind of a public life like I do? These are all things that kind of pop up and it can be a lot. But more importantly than anything else, I'm just sad. You know, but at the end of each of these episodes of the Meaningful Meeting, I say the same thing because it really is the reason why this podcast is here. It's that one day you will tell your story of how you've overcome what you're going through now, and it will become part of someone else's survival guide. Well, I am honored by the fact that so many of you were kind enough to reach out to me after that episode. I'm kind enough to listen to it. But then others of you ask for advice or ask how to help someone going through a similar situation. I appreciate that because it makes me feel as if I'm accomplishing my goal of trying to use Peyton's loss to help others, trying to turn something so negative in my life into something positive for other people. Anytime somebody's listened or been moved by, whether it's the Meaningful Meeting podcast or an old Ace at Large podcast, it means so much to me because it makes me feel like maybe I am living up to what I said I was going to do when I gave Peyton's eulogy. Those things that I wanted to accomplish. When I gave Peyton's eulogy, I told everyone we're going to have to live a little harder, love a little more, laugh a little louder, open our arms a little bit wider to help a few more people because we've got to reach the people that she was going to reach in her life. I don't know that I've done that, to be honest with you. I've tried. I don't know how effective I've been, but not as effective as I would like to be. I know that for sure. And as this posts this week, it's rather unique. It was yesterday, 3 years ago yesterday, that we held Peyton's funeral. And in my mind, I know that means 3 years ago tomorrow is the day that we buried her because her funeral was held in Mooresville, North Carolina. We flew to my hometown in Louisiana on Sunday morning, and Monday morning we had a graveside service where she's buried in Louisiana. And I've said many times, the original Ace at Large podcast grew out of the love that you, the radio family, shared with me and my family during our darkest day and our darkest days, the days after. I wondered how people who don't have this type of love, how people who don't have this outpouring of love and affection for them, if you don't have that kind of support, how do you make it through this? That's why this podcast is here, so we can learn, grow, overcome. There are a few things I have learned through this process that are really important. And I think it's no matter what you're going through. I don't think it matters what you're going through. I think what matters is there are some consistencies. Like if you think, well, nobody in my life has died, not a problem. I'm divorced. My parents were divorced. My parents are both dead. My mom having died just 8 months ago. Until Peyton's death, my divorce was the worst thing I had ever experienced in my life. So whether it's divorce or drinking or marital problems or whatever, this is where we start, because I think there are some similarities. Okay, so there are three parts of this. Number one, and this is so important, and this is something that I have to remind myself all the time. Number one, you are stronger than you think. First, whatever you're going through, you're stronger than you think you are. After I gave Peyton's eulogy, a lot of people said and have still come up to me and said they couldn't believe that I had the strength to pull that off. I appreciate that. I'm not saying it was easy. But in reality, it was nothing compared to what my son did that day. Cade was 17 years old when his sister died. He had never spoken in public before. He's not a public speaker. He's a pretty quiet guy. But when he lost his sister, he lost his best friend. He lost his guide in life. When he was a freshman in high school, she was a senior. That first day experience with her in her car, riding to school, he never stopped talking about it. He lost the person he turned to most. They were very close. They got even closer as the years went on. The older he got, the closer they got. A lot of times Peyton included Cade in things that she didn't have to. But she did it because she loved him. She did it because he meant a lot to her. She did it because it meant a lot to him. He loved her. He looked up to her. And at her funeral, we did something where we allowed people to stand up and say, hey, if you have a story to share something, just stand up and share. Totally impromptu. Nothing planned with this little segment of the funeral. And several people got up and spoke and shared, and my sister talked about her, and her former boss talked glowingly about her, and their friends shared about her. It was really, really special. And then suddenly, when we thought the last person had spoken, Cade stood up. And I remember when he stood up, the room just... He walked to the podium wearing his suit and his pink tie that we did in her honor. And he was the epitome of strength in a time of loss. He had never spoken publicly like that before. He never stood up in front of a packed house, and that room was full. And there was another room that was full. And there were people watching, thousands of people watching on the internet. We didn't know about all that until later, but still, they were all there. And he was funny, and he was outgoing, and he was touching, and he was magnificent. And he didn't plan any of it. He just wanted to share with his sister. He wanted to share about his sister. He wanted her to know that he was there. He wanted to speak up for her. He spoke with no plan, no notes, no preparation. He found the strength to speak from the heart with passion and conviction. And he was funny, and he was kind, and he was loving, and he effing crushed. And I just sat there amazed. I didn't know he had it in him. And here's the key. He would later admit, neither did he. He didn't know in that moment, he did not know that he had that strength. Ask him. He'll tell you. He may have said it last week. He didn't know. But he was moved to stand up and do something. In that moment, a big moment. Quite honestly, pardon the phrase, he could have shit the bed. He could have walked up there and it been awkward and unusual, and it was none of those things. It was precise and from the heart and funny and loving and caring. And there wasn't a dry eye in the place. Laughing, crying, everything. And when he walked away, people were like, wow. If you think it can't be done, you think you can't overcome whatever is happening, if it's just too much, just remember, in that moment, that young man didn't know he had the strength to do it, didn't know what he was going to say when he got up there, didn't know if he was going to pass out. He crushed it because inside of him, he was stronger than he thought he was. He was stronger in that moment than he could have imagined. So are you. So are you. So are you. Number 2, you've got to chart a course for what will happen next. Okay? How are you going to fill that void? You can do what you want, but to me, whether it's a death or a divorce, you've got to decide what you're going to do and chart a course for yourself. What do I mean by that? Well, you've almost got to challenge yourself in some way. Like I talked about with Peyton's eulogy, we're going to live a little harder. We're going to laugh a little louder. That's been more difficult than I thought it was going to be honest with you. It's hard. It's real hard sometimes. And when you take that and add to it the other things that have been happening to me in my life since then, whether it's, the prolonged illness of my mother who died, the prolonged illness, the agonizing illness of Amanda's biological father that he was going through. We've been through 2 terrible deaths in the past year. It's hard to watch, like my mom, she's my hero, smartest person I know, watch her mind be taken from her thanks to Alzheimer's. Once Peyton died, TJ had already renamed our charity after Peyton. And for me, that kind of helped clear the path, It helped track it. We're going to do more. We will help more. I want everyone to help more in Peyton's name. These are the things that I talked about. So I gave the eulogy, having just found out maybe the day before that TJ had decided to change the name of the charity, the Radio Family Charity, to Peyton's Promise. And it's like suddenly it all kind of came in lockstep together. What I was feeling, what he did, it was meant to be. I remember one of my favorite stories that I shared about Peyton with her. It's one of my favorite stories ever about her, was she had a friend who was going through a difficult time. Someone that was really an acquaintance, not a friend, as she would put it, going through a difficult time when she was in high school. And Peyton went over and was talking to her and said she knew that she'd been going through some difficulties. And if she ever needed anything, let her know. She'd be glad to help. And then Peyton said she asked her if she could pray with her. Peyton was baptized. She was not overly religious, but she grew up in the church. We went to church on every Sunday, and we prayed before dinner. We prayed a lot in the house. And that's who she was. She loved helping with grandkids events. She loved meeting the kids. She really enjoyed the day she got to come to the send-offs and see grandkids in all its glory with the big jet and everything and all this kind of crazy stuff. That's how I ended up doing Pedaling for Peyton last year. I just wanted to do something more because I had charted the course. I had charted the path. The path was clear. TJ thought to rename it. I wanted to do more. Boom, they came right together. And next thing you know, Pedaling for Peyton was born. I wanted to live up to this course that I had charted that day when I said I would do more for her in her name, and I didn't feel like I was living up to that. But because I'd made a path, because I'd charted a course, I knew I can be doing more. And we ended up raising $57,000, thanks to you, in a week, in 8 days, 7.5 days. One of the most unbelievable experiences of my life. One of the stupidest, best I can do. I'm not saying you've got to do something like that. What I am saying is that you've got to decide how you're going to react. Now, again, I have not always handled these things well. You got to give yourself time. You got to allow yourself to make mistakes. You got to let yourself grow a little bit through that time because it's hard. But you've got to challenge yourself. Then live up to that challenge and you'll get through this. Because you can't just go, I'm just going to go day to day and figure this thing out. No, you've got to make a decision who you're going to be, how you're going to be. And I don't care what it is. Coming out of a divorce, I had to make a decision. Once the haze began to clear, like, okay, what is my life going to be like? You have to decide who you're going to be, how you're going to live, and how you are going to react to what you are experiencing. You won't always be right. You'll make mistakes. Lord knows I did. Only then, once you've charted this path, can you begin to hold yourself accountable, and accountability is key. Only then can you see if you're living up to being the person you want to be. Only then can you develop a plan for overcoming and improving your life. Without a plan, you won't know how you're doing. Without accountability, you won't know how you're doing. And you can't be held accountable to a plan if you don't make one. Got to have a plan for how you're going to live your life. Got to have a plan for who you're going to be. Got to kind of chart a course for what you want life to be. And finally, I've talked about this one a lot. Give yourself time to grieve. You can be as strong as you think you are. You can make all the plans in the world, but you've also got to give yourself time. Time to grieve the loss of the person. Time to grieve the loss of a marriage. Time to grieve the loss of a career. Time to grieve the person you used to be. And prepare to be this new person. Why is it important? Because without it, again, I'm not a therapist, this is my opinion. Without giving yourself some time to grieve what has happened, you're just going to simply hide the hurt. And that's going to come back to haunt you. There are some things that have happened in my life that I can't get into detail about, but I hold a tremendous amount of resentment over them. And I could have done a better job of grieving those things along the way. I'm not saying sit around and languish in it and feel sorry for yourself, but there are going to be days. It's only natural. Sometimes there are days. Allow yourself time to breathe. Allow yourself some time to just be sad. Allow yourself to think back on what is lost, because only then can you come to terms with it. Only then can you sit and go, okay, that's what I've lost. I acknowledge that. Now I got to chart a course and be stronger. Only then can you start to move forward. It takes time, and it's different for everybody. I don't know that I'm pretty positive, there will never come a time in my life when I see certain things or hear certain things that I don't cry that fast thinking about Peyton. But I got to allow myself to do that now. I've learned that I have to allow myself that time. I have to accept that. Can't fight it because it just makes it worse. You got to grieve it. Only then will you fully understand what you've experienced. And only then will you fully understand just how strong you've been to get through it. And only then will you be able to chart a course for who you want to be and how you want to live the rest of your life. Important thing to note, though, there are always going to be setbacks. There are days where it's overwhelming. There are days, whether it's a feeling of hopelessness or a sense of grief, those things, maybe both. It's going to happen. Accept it. Learn from it. Be able to let it go and keep moving. You know, my mom said so many great things, but my favorite is still, it's one foot in front of the other. Eventually you'll get there. Just keep moving forward. You know, maybe sometimes you've got to stop for a little while. Maybe you just need to rest for a day, or the next day you're back up moving forward again. Point is, you can do it. You will do it. You have the capability of doing it. You have the capability of making everything better. And I'm saying this to myself as much as I am to you. Trying to tell myself that I can do the things I'm trying to do in life so desperately bad. You're stronger than you think you are. Chart yourself a course. Give yourself a little bit of time to grieve and then get after it. And remember that your story is important. Remember your story. Remember those feelings. Acknowledge all of that stuff, because one day you will tell your story of how you've overcome what you're going through right now. And your story will be a part of someone else's survival guide. And that is a really special thing.
Now, whatever you're going through, you're not alone. You are a part of the Meaningful Meeting, presented by the Radio Network. Copyright ATJ Inc. 2022.